censor yourself. All
Not
right.
easy.
Yeah, I was born in the middle of fighting in reservations. There we go.
Was your uh, town affected by the brush fires?
No, my folks, but they still were affected. And majority of those epic fires, folks are good. What is
I see.
but only like 3 or 4 days.
Wow.
Yeah,
So the smoke was probably blocking out the sun like it does
it was
here, I suppose.
epic. It made it to. There was
Wow.
pictures online of folks in,
Yuck.
and their cameras.
Wow. Wow. Okay. You know, these are the stories we deal with. I'm surprised that we didn't get some effect of the smoke here.
Yeah, I mean, it started. But it really like mass media. They, everyone was calling on the prime minister. Firefighter dead. He went to Hawaii for a holiday,
Oh,
Oh
and
yeah, I saw that.
yeah. So what happened was like he went to Hawaii. It was meant to be for a week, and the media in Australia just like started kicking his ass, like, and
Well deserved.
yeah, and he cut it short as he should. In fact, he should have never left, but he cut it short and came back, and it was that whole fiasco that started like making it push towards mass media. And it was kind of by Christmas time, like, I've seen it everywhere. Big
Wow.
celebrities set up funds and stuff for it, but they say there's more than 1 billion animals killed by it and more than 2 million hectares, which was twice the amount of the Amazon fires earlier last year.
Jeez.
And it kind of like those habitats for the koalas will take before a eucalyptus tree can handle a koala eating it without the tree dying. It takes about 20 years,
Wow.
and those habitats. It's unlikely those koalas will ever get to return to the habitat they came from, the ones that survived and were rescued.
Right. Wow.
It's pretty crazy, but it's just like complete inaction from a really conservative government, basically.
Yeah, it seemed like there was a lot of down downplaying of the climate change aspect of it.
Oh,
For
for
sure.
sure. I mean, we've got Australia has a prime minister who was only like earlier last year running around Parliament House with a big lump of coal. It's all pro coal, so yeah, it gives you an idea of where he's coming from. But just like all politicians, he's getting a good chunk of money put in his back pocket, so
yeah.
he's happy to ignore things like climate change. But
Yeah.
the really interesting one is I've read a bunch of scientific articles is that they're calling Australia the canary in the cage, the canary in the because Australia where it's situated on the globe has one of the thinnest ozone layers.
Yeah.
And so if we're seeing this kind of stuff in Australia, we're going to start to see it in more countries in time.
Right. So you guys are a little ahead of it.
We're ahead of the game.
You can call it that, right? Yeah.
First to suffer. I
Ahead
suppose.
of the apocalypse.
Shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good. It's really
Wow.
bad.
Well, here we are with Tom Hall. Let us know how the sound is. I think my mic seems a little bit hot. We'll tweak these things. So, this is Mod City Live, number 10. We are lucky enough to have Tom Hall in the studio today from Cycling 74. Also, of course, a prolific artist, a standout artist, I think, in our modular community, uh, traveling the world, spreading the awareness of the modular mindset, both audio and visual. So we're just really super happy to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Joe and Victor. I'm stoked to hang out with you guys, actually.
Yeah,
Great.
likewise.
Welcome.
So I certainly first heard of Tom Hall through Cycling 74, working with Max. I've been working with Max for almost 20 years now. Scary, but that was really my first and deepest, I think, experience with modular. And quickly after starting to learn Max, I realized this was not something you could do on your own. This was a community learning effort, much like modular synthesis is. And you can't really learn Max without the access to the forums. And quickly, I noticed that you and some of your amazing colleagues, Greg Taylor, Darwin, uh, uh, were kind of helping to keep the show afloat, keep the the Max. It was way before Max for Live. The Max community active, engaged. Uh, uh, yeah, all of these things. So, uh, tell us a little bit about yourself. We were just talking about Australia. Uh, tell us where you come from.
Yeah, let's rewind a little bit to before the cycling days. But yeah, I grew up in Tasmania, not even in Hobart, Tasmania, which is kind of becoming quite renowned now for the gallery that's down there and the Dark Mofo music event they hold every year now, where they fly in international artists for one-off shows. But I grew up in the north of the state, which is basically like a bunch of red kind of volcanic type rich soil. So it's very popular for farming potatoes and poppies, for pyrethrum. And yeah, there's not much going on there. It's a beautiful place, but there's not a lot going on. There's not much creatively, and you either get it the hell out of there, or or you end up in a kind of blue collar work warehouse, which I started at. So I finished school and went to do that thing where you just move boxes around, and I did it for 3 years, and thankfully saved up all my money and was like, do I really want to be here in another 30 years time? Because I've just done 3 and it felt like 30 years. And like, oh, I'm going to university. So I had a real keen interest in photography. And I still love photography a lot. And that was what I went to university to study. And I think it wasn't that I was busting to get out of Tasmania, but I certainly was wanting a new environment. So I applied to a lot of different universities, and I got into all of them. I got into Hobart University of Tasmania, got into RMIT in Melbourne, which is amazing university. I got into the Australian National University in Canberra, and I think I went for Canberra mainly because it was like coming from a very small town, and the first time leaving home, it was kind of like the most approachable in terms of like Melbourne was still quite daunting. I'd been there, but I couldn't see myself living there yet. So I went to Canberra. It turned out to be a really great decision, and I did later found out like ANU, the Australian National University, is one of the top 10 research universities in the world. They get a ton of funding, ton of opportunities. That exchange program with Kyoto Seika University in Japan.
Oh wow!
And I applied to go and study photography there, and this was the end of my second year, and I got in. So I get to Japan. It's very early 2000, and email communication is still not quite on the level that it is now. And I'll still never forget. I got there. I'm jet lagged. It's the longest flight I've been on by times 10 ever. First time traveling internationally. And I never forget, I meet the sensei and I tell him I'm there for photography, and he gives me the classic Japanese like no sign. It says no photo media. And I'm like, there's no photography department, and there's been a miscommunication, and I'm signed up to come there for a year.
Oh no.
And I'm like, what? And they realize pretty quickly there's a whole mistake here, and I'm kind of freaking out a little bit because I'm like signed up to be there basically for 12 months, and I'm like, well,
What
yeah.
did you sign up for?
Well, so they ended up putting me into ESO studies, which is like an umbrella term for media arts. So I straight into a second year class of studying After Effects and Pro Tools. I was in a J-pop recording session. I mean, very formalized kind of music, electronic music, and media studies. Not so conceptual. And I came from a pretty conceptual arts background, and I think it was probably 2 or 3 months into this, and my sensei, he kind of could see that I was struggling a little bit, like with the very formalized approach, and he asked me to come to his office, and I was like, I'm in trouble. Like, he's gonna send me home. And he pulls out a laptop and he says he wants to show me some software, and he shows me Max.
Wow.
And I'll never forget it. It's like, what is this thing? It's crazy looking. And, I quickly realized that he's like, I was like, so you mean to say like I can build my own processing networks for video and audio and data, and he's like, yeah, like you design how you want to do it. So conceptually that really spoke to me, and he gave me a few patches to get started with. Told me how I could reset the demo at the end of every month, so I didn't need to buy a license, like the kind of stuff that you expect from a professor.
Yeah, the real secrets.
The real secrets.
Wow.
But
Things you can't really do anymore.
Yeah, and there's not really any point anymore. I mean, it basically involved making a whole petition of your drive and like having max quarantine in a certain area, and then wiping that petition every end of every. It's really, now that Max is a subscription, it's just you wouldn't put yourself through that pain threshold anymore. But yeah, and I just got it, and I kind of ran with it. I mean, at that time, Apple PowerBooks were really expensive in Australia, like really expensive, and they were about 1/3 of the price in Japan. So I bought a PowerBook, which was my first like laptop, the old titanium PowerBook, and the hilarious thing is, like, then for like I literally milked that thing for about 5 or 6 years, and I always had to have the kanji on the keyboard. I had the Japanese keyboard, but for the money I saved, it was totally worth it. So yeah, I mean, that was Japan, and it was amazing. And I went back several times since to tour and the likes. But then I went back to Australia. I graduated. Never really took another photo as part of my course again. Like, my graduating honors works were all like interdisciplinary kind of like multimedia, sound and visual pieces.
Wow.
And I really pushed the spectrum for my department. I ended up getting first class honors. So it was like I was able to convince my lecturers it was legit.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And I mean, to be able to look back on that time as such a formative moment for you, and such a change, right?
Oh, I mean, huge. I mean, I just look back now and it's like, wow, like I took a big step to leave Tasmania. I mean, it's a thing that a lot of folks in where I grew up with have problem. I grew up in an area called Devonport, and they called it the Devonport Dream, and that was to be able to leave and not lose all your money and have to come back and live on your parents' sofa. Like, this happened to so many friends and my sister's friends, and I managed to do it.
I think that's something that a lot of Americans can certainly identify with. A lot of small town origins in America, where people strive with all they can to leave. It's
How
one of
big was
those
your
old
town?
stories.
I lived on the cusp of kind of two towns. So I was in the country of Tasmania, and I mean, the whole of Tasmania is basically rural, but I didn't even live in one of the little towns. The closest little town called Latrobe was about 5,000, and very close to there, which was the main town called Devonport, and that's about 20,000. Yeah.
So how did you get exposed to conceptual art in such a far-flung place?
Yeah. I mean, it really came from, my parents are pretty good about exposing me to all sorts of things. I mean, my parents have very diverse listening tastes, and I'm not sure they're even conscious of that, but everything from like Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers duets to Black Sabbath would be in the record collection, and I would consequently listen to all of it. I mean, for as you're growing up, it's passive listening because it was like whatever mum wanted to jam on the weekend while she did the vacuuming.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was Dolly Parton, sometimes it was Black Sabbath, and I mean, if I'm to think about the first kind of music stuff that I got into, the first band that I was absolutely obsessed with was Motley Crue. And you know why I was obsessed with them? Because of their T-shirts.
Yeah.
Like the Motley Crue T-shirts,
so
the branded T-shirts.
So how that happened was, as a kid, we'd go and visit my grandfather in Devonport in the town in the morning, and then after we visited him, we'd go to the roller skating rink, right? And of course, there's some older kids there, and you're young and impressionable, and I think these older kids, they're fast on their roller skates, and they're really cool, and they all wore metal shirts. And
You're like,
I'm like, those shirts are freaking cool. So and just something about those shirts, like they're a bit offensive, and we're talking like late 80s, right? So this is the whole where Congress here in America was trying to ban metal and all
Yeah.
of this crazy stuff. So it really was like, I
Fear
think,
of Satanism. And
yeah, I think I had a
Dungeons and
little bit
Dragons
of
and everything.
I had a little bit of anarchism in me, and
Sure.
I then asked some of the older kids to like dub Motley Crue tapes for me, so then I got dubs of them, and my parents were okay with it. Like they were okay with me listening to that music, and but it was more like, even more than the music, it was just their approach to life, and just be yourself, do your own thing, go against the grain, and I mean that, and I think there was a whole conceptual aspect to hair metal. In fact, huge conceptual aspect. You could say it was all
Sure.
it was all conceptual.
Sure. Yeah. It's very
And
glam.
so I mean, but then my folks would do other kind of fun stuff. I mean, Australia in the late 80s, early 90s was pretty progressive at that time. So you could go to a lot of museums and science centers, and they would have the Imagination Center, where there'd just be crazy stuff. Like the Imagination Center back then was kind of like what Meow Wolf is now,
Oh, wow.
kind of thing. There's like crazy stuff to make you think more, and my parents were just good about, like, we didn't have the internet back then, so it was like, let's go for a drive on Sunday and see what we could discover. But
Did you ever get robbed for gasoline in
No.
Australia? I grew up thinking Australia was a post-apocalyptic
right, yeah.
world where
see
roving
where-
bands of lunatics.
Yeah, I see. I mean, I see exactly. I'm a massive Mad Max fan. Oh my god, like those films are incredible. I mean, especially the first two, where
Yeah.
before it got too Hollywood. I mean, three is still pretty amazing with Tina Turner.
Yeah, there's something about Thunderdome.
Right, 2 man in, 1 man leaves.
Yes,
Yeah.
Master Blaster.
Yeah.
Uh,
But that second one in particular is kind of phenomenal, and I mean, film wise and creative wise, that they both really put Australia on the map.
For sure.
Like,
yeah, it's it really gave a storyline to that setting as well for people who had not really had any much experience with Australia, other than, I guess, my other only real childhood experience with Australia would be koala bears and Tasmanian devils. I love
Right.
Tasmanian devils.
yeah,
Actually, I think all of ours at our age, I'd have to put it there. I'm a little older than you, but it was Men at Work.
Oh, yeah,
that
for
was that was
sure.
when I first
Oh, sure,
started
of course.
saying, we can't.
Yeah, I mean,
It's real.
Australia.
It all came pouring over after the success of Mad Max. I feel
I
like.
was so lucky to grow up in the 80s and the 90s there, because like in terms of like creative innovation, Australia did its own thing, because at that time financially there was a huge gap between the dollar. It just wasn't even possible really for Australian actors or creative people to leave and then make it in a much bigger kind of country like America or Europe. It was, I think, a little tougher. So there was just a lot of interesting creative innovation that just really stayed on the continent, on in the island, you know. So in the 80s there was a lot of Midnight Oil. I was a big Midnight Oil fan, still love them, especially because, and I still feel like there's a gap that's missing in Australian bands right now, is like, you know, Midnight Oil really pushed that cusp of like art and politics, like, and they really took it to the government. I mean, Peter Garrett ended up being a senator, you know.
Huh.
So
Wow.
yeah, it's kind of amazing. But yeah, Men at Work. I mean, that was like for theme songs of summer in the 80s. Like,
Yeah, I never heard of that sound before. And
Right.
that's, I mean, I remember being that age and hearing it and just being like, well, what is that? Because, you know.
Yeah.
Another artist who really like left Australia and made a mark on the world. Mark Knopfler, right?
Oh,
That's his
totally.
name.
I mean, and it kept going. Like there was a classic like 2-piece electronic boy band type Savage Garden that came out of
Oh, sure.
in the 90s. I
Mhm.
mean, there was a lot of great stuff happening in the 90s down there. Yeah. I mean, it's still amazing stuff going on down there for sure. But now there's more of a crossover between Australia and America and cultural influences. Before it was more insular and kind of generated just within the country, I feel.
The world's definitely glued together, hasn't it?
For sure.
It's
And I
like-
mean, it's natural with the internet and that
Yeah.
things happen.
It's interesting.
Let's try to bridge a divide here between you being raised on Black Sabbath and Dolly Parton and reaching somehow where you are musically today. How did these worlds connect?
Yeah. So, and you know, I graduated. Australia has a really liberal arts scene, and particularly in the early 2000s, the Australian Arts Council had no shortage of grants and stuff you could apply for to just pursue a line of creative research on your own steam. You didn't need to be tied to a university or anything. So I graduated. I kept experimenting with sound, and I was still I went home to Tasmania after I did that, and still wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was thinking maybe I'll go to Japan and teach English there and pursue electronic music there, or maybe I'll move to Brisbane because I've got some friends that live there. I didn't really have a particular area I was destined to go to, but I got a small grant to make an album, and I moved to Brisbane because I had friends there. I didn't really know the city, but it has a great climate, and I went there, and I was like, the deadline to use this grant money was coming up, so I just by chance ended up living very close to a famous like dual cantilever bridge there called the Story Bridge. And it's an amazing piece of work, and it was basically the guy that built the Story Bridge then finished that and went on to build the more famous Sydney Harbour Bridge. The Story Bridge, as legend tells it,
very famous bridge.
yeah,
in
the Sydney
Sydney.
Harbour Bridge, I mean, is phenomenal. I mean, people just think of Australia and they usually think of the Opera House or the Story Bridge, or the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
And they kind of overlook each other.
They
in a
do,
sense.
they do.
Diplo just performed a set on the top of the bridge like
I didn't know
a couple
that.
months ago.
Hilarious.
It's on YouTube if you guys want to see
But
it.
yeah, I mean, but I ended up living in a little suburb that and my room looked straight at this bridge, and at nighttime, especially in summer when it's really hot, it has these huge expansion joints because the whole bridge like basically is a living organism, and it just creaked and groaned and made the most insane sounds. And I just like, what am I gonna make this album about? And I ended up just sampling the bridge a lot, like got contact mics and put them all over it, and I made this whole album out of it, and was like doing it all myself, like pressing it myself and everything. Had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, oh, I can do all this myself. And then I had a little exhibition in Brisbane, and it was like this piece I was doing was like a feedback video piece using like surveillance of people going past this shop front window and then feeding it back on itself. So there was a whole conceptual rationale surrounding it, but the short part of the story is the exhibition got broken into and all the technology used in it got stolen. And it was a bummer because the whole show got cut short, but it's like actually ended up being a great thing for me. The state paper, the Courier Mail, called me, wanted to do a hard luck story, like, oh, poor artist loses all his gear. And I was like, and back then there's no GoFundMe, right? So
Yeah.
it was basically like, maybe that's my only chance to get some money to get this gear back.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh man, do I really want to be that person in the second page of the newspaper? Like, oh, hard luck story. I'm like, no. I'm like, hey, you know what? I have this album coming out, and it's about the Story Bridge. And the girl who called me was like, oh, really? And like, we go off on this tangent, and I think she forgot that what she originally called me for, and ended up thinking she'd called me about this album. And they did a second page full story on me and making the album. Never mentioned the gallery and didn't need to. Like,
amazing.
And then this program called Extra, which is like a fun like late afternoon. They did a whole like television program on me about the making of the Story Bridge album, and like it got me in the Australian, which is a national publication. So of course I go back to the Australian Arts Council and it's like, hey, look what I did with the $1,000 you gave me. And they're like, you want some more money?
Yeah.
So I'm like, then I took it on tour, and I did some like sound walks about like, walking around your kind of area where you live and finding unique sounds, and that got a feature in a newspaper, and it just kind of kept snowballing like that. But at the same time, I could see that I felt I really wanted to be part of a community, right? And we're talking like 2006. Ableton is still pretty new. Like, you still basically buy an M Audio controller and you get a free copy of Ableton, those kind of days.
Yeah.
And, so I was like, oh, let's see if I can start like a user group, like a hangout group, right? So I put the call out in Brisbane, a ton of people come. It was amazing. We had like 30 or 40 people who were rocking up. I was like...
All for Ableton.
Yeah, all to just hang out and nerd out about Ableton. And, I've never been shy of like just directly contacting artists or businesses or whatever and being like, can we make a connection here? Like, because I've always been like, well, worst case scenario, they say no, you know? Whereas I just didn't ever have that hesitance. So I was like, well, let me just email Ableton and tell them about this cool user group we've got going on. And I emailed them. I basically talked to everyone at Ableton except for Gerhard Bale, the CEO. So I was like emailing with Robert Henke and, all of these other folks there. And they literally sent me like a massive, massive box of swag from Germany all the way out to shit, like hoodies and t-shirts and banners and live licenses, and it was amazing, the kind of support. Like, we were one of the first user groups at that time. There was us in Brisbane, this city most people are not really sure where it exists in the world, New York City, and I think there was one in Tokyo. So yeah,
Corners of the world.
We rocked this group for like 2 or 3 years, and what happened was through that connection, I ended up being an alpha tester of Ableton. And then I fast forward another few years, things keep moving along. I went to tour in Europe, and I'm playing in Berlin, and some guy walks in and sees me, and I'm using Max and Ableton in the most hilarious way. Like, I'm literally routing outputs of Ableton directly, like taking the physical output of my sound card, putting it back into an input to send audio between Live and Max, and like basically, playing with fire.
Yeah.
But it worked, and people were observing me play this set, and this person just said, "Look, you have to contact my friend. His name's Andrew Pask. He works for Cycling 74. He is. You just got to contact him." And so I contacted him, and this is like Max for Live is in alpha. So I got to get in at the ground floor with Max for Live, and that was the beginning of my kind of like connection with Cycling 74.
Andrew's cool.
Andrew's a legend. I mean, honestly, I probably wouldn't even be sitting in this room right now if it wasn't for him. He's a good guy, and he's a great programmer. He's also an incredible artist. That guy has some stories.
Yeah.
He toured with Michael Jackson. He helped Ice-T. All this crazy shit.
He was friends of our John Vaughn, so we kind of met him through Native Instruments, and he was just a really cool dude.
Yeah, he's also from down that way. He's a New Zealander.
Oh,
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
he's a New Zealander, which I think helps him and I get along. We
Sure.
have this camaraderie. We can take the piss out of America
Yes,
and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
that's right.
But yeah, I mean, it's like kind of just one of those funny things that just snowballed. I mean, things were pretty different back then, like it wasn't like, I feel like things have changed a little bit. You contact maybe another artist or a company now, and the first thing they do is check your Instagram or what kind of profile does this person have? Like but back then it was like, oh, this guy's keen, this guy's excited, let's help him out.
Yep. I think there's still a bit to be plucked away there. I think there's the bigger picture is a message of community building, like grassroots community building, right?
Right.
Doing things without approval or sanctioning from a body or a company per se, but rather because you have a deep love for this thing and you wanted to spread that and collect all of the other people who love this thing in one place and talk about it and share this thing, and there's so much that seems like something that will never go away, right?
Completely, Joe. That touches on a really important point. I feel that is sometimes overlooked now in creative industries. Like capitalism would like us all to think that we're completely individuals and that we do everything on our own terms and blah 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 blah, but we're not. The human race is a symbiotic machine, and it's like, you might call yourself a solo artist, but you didn't get there completely 100% from the start on your own steam. It's pretty likely hundreds of folks helped you along the way, and it's like I try to always keep that in mind, because I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for tens and tens, probably hundreds of folks who just like had a good word to say about me, or like gave me a leg up in a situation. And it's like, community is so important. It's huge. You learn things. It's an area to try new things. It's an area to try new things and not be ridiculed or feel like you failed. And that user group, funnily, had no format at all. I mean, I can't really remember if we even were like, oh yeah, no, okay, the next user group, we're gonna completely, break down Operator. I think we just turned up and we shared, and we learnt, and yeah, it was
You just
really
make friends.
Yeah.
Right? Like you just talk about whatever strikes you and whatever gets the conversation happening, and you share your techniques. It doesn't have to be any more formal than that. The formality of it could be, let's all have a beer together,
yeah
right?
yeah
Like after Victor and I had left Native Instruments, we all pined for those old days when we would hang out after work and have a beer together. And so we started a meetup that was just, let's go have a beer on Friday afternoons. And
Tech night.
uh,
Tech day.
John Vaughn, our former boss, had also left recently, and we were all, he put up a meetup on meetup.com, and it was kind of like, again, an informal, hey, we're having beers on Fridays, and we're all producers. Come on and join us. And that's how we met Josh Weatherspoon.
yeah
He first, he when he first came to LA, he somehow found that meetup, and that's how
true.
we all met him. And shout out to Producer's Kitchen.
yeah
And,
Josh rules.
Yeah, I mean,
Love Josh.
Good guy.
so many other colleagues of ours now, fellow instructors at Icon, fellow musicians in our scene, in the modular scene. So many people just came through there, and it wasn't ever any formal thing. Just let's all hang out and chat, and then in that atmosphere, of course, all of this stuff comes up. We talk about it.
Yeah, things happen. You learn tricks. You learn about opportunities, or someone learns about you and your capabilities. And then when an opportunity arises, they don't have to think too hard. Oh, well, I'll just get that guy because I already know him and he's already easy to hang out with. I mean,
Freakazoids.
yeah. I mean, sometimes these days it's like.
It's so true.
If you need to spend time with someone in a tight space, you wanna know that you're not gonna be killing each other after 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's important, and it's so important for us to have those interactions. But we're also insular, and we'd like to spend time in our nice, quiet, dark cell where we can get work done. But
Totally.
if
Totally.
you want to share that work with somebody, you have to find someone who cares. You have
Yeah,
to
and
go
I
out
mean,
of the house.
if I'm to think like, yeah, I love having alone time and be able to like push my skills, develop new skills, learn. I try to learn a new thing every day, be it big or small. But ultimately, what am I trying to achieve? I'm trying to like make something that I could share with a wider audience. I mean, that's my concepts, genres, sonics, all of that stuff aside. I mean, ultimately, I want to create an experience for others, and yeah, I just love this idea. I mean,
What would you say is like the blend of your Mac setup with your Eurorack usage?
I mean, it's constantly changing. I don't think I'm one of these people who will ever have a completely locked down setup. I mean, it's just I tend to go.
Do you keep them separate? Or are you liking to blend them, or
So-
whatever
My last album that came out in 2018, like that was a completely like symbiotic kind of relationship between modular synthesis hardware and Max. And if anything, now I've taken to not playing Eurorack out live. And it was kind of a conscious choice. And personally, it was like more that like I love modular synthesis, I love hardware, but like I couldn't sonically cross the different kind of terrains or territories of the sound they wanted to within a set, because you'd simply just I'd need to take out 5 cases of 104 HP or something, and at which point it just starts to be
ridiculous for 1 hour.
Yeah. So, I like to take people on a journey when I play. I like to challenge people, provide, challenge them, but also then, it's a journey, my performances. And I couldn't achieve that. I wasn't able to achieve that to my personal satisfaction just purely using Eurorack. I did play a slew of shows where I was combining both of them, But it also becomes this point of like, I'm trying to physically, like, as intangibly do too much in 40 minutes. Like, and it was just stressful.
Yeah,
I wasn't
you want to
enjoying-
have fun on stage.
Yeah, I wasn't enjoying myself. I'm like literally like got a list of 100 different event points I need to hit where I need to change a certain thing and then switch a patch cord and then I need to change this thing in the max patch and then it was like, oh god, this is stressful. And
You're
I'm
going back and forth from device to device, and
yeah, I mean, I had them talking to one another pretty adequately, both through MIDI and through control voltages and the likes. But yeah, it just was like this thing. I was like, I do play internationally, and it's also the other complication now is like it's just getting harder to fly with hardware.
Mhm.
It's getting complicated, and TSA doesn't get any easier.
yeah,
Going through TSA with a Fader Fox, couple of Fader Fox MIDI controllers and Max on your laptop doesn't, every time I went through there with my URAC, you get pulled aside, they go through it, they
Swabbed.
swipe it,
yeah.
they ask what the hell this thing is.
Do you
And
have
that's
the new
all
Fader
just-
Foxes?
I do, I love that.
How's the screen?
The screen, I don't have the screen one.
Okay, because that's the new one they just.
The new one, I don't
Yeah.
have that one. That one looks appealing.
Yeah.
I like that idea of having the visual feedback element
Yeah.
versus more traditional MIDI controllers where you don't kind of have a screen.
Yeah,
I
they're
mean,
solid
push
controllers.
is an exception, and also the NI controls. But I like the Fader Foxes because they're rugged. They have onboard snapshots, which is a feature that doesn't make it to a lot of MIDI controllers these days. The old Bitstream 3X had 100 snapshots. So you can be playing your Max Patch physically purely on the controller, and you can be like, well, I like this point at which I'm at sonically, and I may want to come back to this point while I'm playing live. You can literally just make a real snapshot of all those controls at that moment,
Wow.
move on, and come back to that point.
And it just when you recall it, it just sends those values
Just sends
everywhere.
those. It takes a snapshot of
That's
all the
dope.
values. I mean, it's a feature that I don't know why it isn't on more hardware MIDI controllers anymore. I mean, push. Right? If you want to you can make a snapshot, but you have to use a bunch of Max Live devices. I mean, I guess that's why they don't have it. But yeah.
Interesting. Good to know.
Would be nice to have that quick access.
Yeah, so the Fader Foxes are the current controllers, as far as I know, that the only ones that provide that as a function, and it's as a live performer using that and wanting to do like I'll use Max Live, but I'm really not into like touching the trackpad. For me, that it breaks this kind of flow for me personally, and
Yeah.
so I am all controller based, or I do use the iPad with Max has a kind of app called Mirror that basically mirrors the UI controls within your Max Patch. And I will use that for certain aspects too. I mean, the multi-touch control of the iPad and Mirror is pretty awesome. And that combined with a physical controller like the Fader Fox, they have one called the MX12. It has some of the nicest faders, 60mm, so decent amount of throw on those. And it's just really nice to physically handle. And I mean, that's the aspect of URAC. Ultimately, that's the aspect of URAC that
The
I
tactile.
really loved about playing live. It wasn't that I wasn't patching live. I mean, kudos to the folks that start with a completely blank URAC system, and that's just not what I was about. And but ultimately, I just would find that I would end up making a URAC system that was kind of like a Max Patch in itself anyway. It'd be like, oh, I'm going to start in this little corner of my... And then I'm never going to go back there again. I'm going to move over here, and then here, and then here, and then that's it. I wouldn't really repatch live or anything like that.
The fear of twisting the knob in the wrong direction.
Oh
right?
man,
And then-
I mean, well, yeah, you would turn up to shows and nothing sounds the same as when it did, 40 minutes earlier when you were at home.
Oh yeah.
But my old trick there would be to get blue tack and press a piece of blue tack in against the knob and the faceplate, and it would stop the knob kind of moving in transport.
There's that interdisciplinary artist training coming into play.
Yeah, yeah.
Most musicians don't know
Well,
what blue tack is.
Yeah,
Probably.
blue tack, or literally just pull the knob off so that it would just be the say for clouds, for example, where when the pitch changes by even the smallest amount, it goes from sounding good to shit pretty fast. And so I just pull the pitch knob off. So there'd be the shaft of the encoder, but it was less likely to get messed up.
Interesting.
You could still adjust it if you needed to, but
Did you fly with your Eurorack?
Oh,
when you
yeah.
performed with it?
yeah, I took it to Mexico a few times, New York. I mean, I didn't have any problems, but
But you're limited, like you were saying. You'd prefer to have more cases than fewer, and if you're flying,
oh yeah,
you really can only take one handheld
really,
case.
yeah. And these days, honestly, even a 6U 104 HP, you're on the cusp. Like that
Sure.
thing will just fit in the overhead baggage. The little square thing they have there that they never actually make anyone put their bags in there, but they could say, oh, you can't take this on, and what are you gonna do?
Yeah, there's just a story this week about an African kora player from Paris who came to perform in the U.S. and on the way back to Paris, TSA destroyed his priceless instrument that takes ages to assemble, much less fine tune, and it's one of those things. Sometimes they'll make you check your instrument.
They
and-
really don't care, and they don't
Yeah.
care. They really don't care. I think you only have to just observe them when you go through security, just with even your keys and your iPhone. Like they don't care. They don't even want to be there. I
Of
mean,
course, yeah.
it's sad, but unfortunately, I don't see it getting any better. It
Yeah.
just seems to be getting worse. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation with travel with our instruments, and something we always have to be very thoughtful of ahead of time, or else we end up very sad
Yeah.
upon arrival.
So ultimately, these days, I use Eurorack and 5U a lot in the studio, and I tend to stuff ends up getting, being the kind of core basis of sounds that I'll then take into Max and be using those elements of those sounds live, not in terms of like playback, but in terms of like resynthesis and the likes, and it's just like I had to ask myself, like, what am I trying to achieve as a live performer? Like, is it important that I turn up with this Eurorack system? Is it important that I turn up? What, like, that's not the important aspect for me. It's like, it's an ultimately whatever it is. It's the instrument that allows me to convey my interest in sound and present my kind of piece of work. I got less attached to being like, oh, it needs to be this thing and this other thing, I need to always have my Eurorack there. It's not that ultimately became less important to me.
Let's talk about your performance and your work the last few years, because your work, I think, maybe stemming from your interdisciplinary multimedia background, goes well beyond just sound performance, right? We have what else fits into your performance? How do you conceptualize this whole thing?
I really think of them as more like an art piece than, as you heard, my background, it's not, as far as my formal music studies go, we're talking like, if I'm to talk like literal formal music studies, it's no more than a handful of months. I mean, most of my knowledge gained in the world of sound and music has all been hands-on experience. So, I still will have a very strong kind of conceptual art background, and that's the thing that really drives me. I mean, I'm very interested in this possibility of like new sonic ways to communicate. I find it unacceptable to be like, well, John Channing found FM synthesis back in the early 80s at Stanford. Oh, are we just going to be like, are we satisfied? Is that it for finding new ways to synthesize sound? No, we're going to find new ways. It's not going to come as easy as and not that it was easy for John. I'm not saying he found it on his lunch break, but
There's physics to be
yeah,
discovered,
I mean,
right?
it's not going to come as easy again. So I'm really interested in that aspect, and that's where, I'm seeing a lot of back and forth about hating AI. I don't like AI. It's going to take the musician spot, or machine learning is going to kill this and that. But I think we can leverage all of those new technologies to help us find new ways to synthesize sound and create sound. That really interests me. That drives me. I'm also, when I play live, I'm trying to create an experience. I mean, we're so caught up. We're so busy these days. It's like my mother-in-law retired a year and a half ago, and she's still running around saying how busy she is. And it's just because she's used to the way we live these days. I'm like, when I asked her recently, like, why are you so busy? What do you have to do this week? And she'd stop for a moment. It's like, well, I have to go to TJ Maxx. And I'm like, well, it sounds like you're really busy. But, we are so caught up now, and like, it's like we don't give ourselves any downtime. So for me, I'm like, create a moment for people to be so engaged sonically and visually with what I'm doing that they just ultimately I'm trying to time travel. I'm trying to just transcend time here for a moment. I mean, that's what I'm trying to create, an experience for folks that just forget about all the things we are conscious of these days. We are so conscious as a society, but I don't think that's healthy in some ways.
Yeah, we have to have those moments to break from
Yeah.
the here and now, and
Yeah.
everything that's permeating our day-to-day lives, and escape into something that's different.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in pursuing that aspect as a performer, as someone who presents an experience for folks. Yeah, there's musical aspects in there. There's rhythmic elements. There's sound beds that intertwine, but ultimately, I think of it as more of a creative arts project than actual musical act.
And what forms does this performance take? You do have the sound aspect, obviously.
Yeah.
What else? What else accompanies this?
Yeah, I mean, I was always interested from early days. That first tour I went on to support the Story Bridge album. In fact, I had a visual element, and then, computer power was a lot less back in the 2000s, so I couldn't synthesize visuals live at the same time as doing audio. It just wasn't possible. But I did create some pretty wild kind of video that represented the sonic aspects as well. And for me, I feel like in order to create that kind of right experience for the audience, there needs to be a link between the visual elements and the sound. But I'm not talking about the classic, techno club where it's just the pulsing video that matches the kick drum. I'm more interested in pursuing this kind of symbiotic relationship, and it's almost like synesthesia or synesthetic kind of quality, where there's links to harmony and there's links to the rhythmic elements, but not in a literal sense. So perhaps, for example, the frequencies emitted from a sound bed that I'm generating live in Max are then filling up a matrix of audio, visual values that are then being kind of processed through like an OpenGL shader or something along those lines. And it's not necessarily, pulsing or reacting in a real time, like in a kind of structured sequence manner, but more in that they're symbiotic. They're driving one another. They're reacting and back and forth, to and fro.
That influence might not be that one-to-one, very direct connection that you see with, like you were saying, with some club visuals and
Yeah.
some basic video content VJing where we might have clock sync or something like this,
Right.
which maybe like frequency, the frequency spectrum being broken up into a couple of bands so that the whites are flashing, in response to hi hats. The low end is
Yeah.
responding to the kick drum, but it you're getting into far more complex reactive
Chord
interactions between these musical elements. Does your music typically have those type of beat structures that we find in techno?
My beat structures tend to not be, four on the floor. So again, this is a combination of this interest in kind of transcending typical, by the clock sound domains, and more about this idea of, just say the easiest way to explain it is like when you go to do something and you're doing it and you look at the clock later and you're like, wow, 3 hours just went by. Or the other one where you're in something, it's usually something you don't like, and the minute feels like 10 minutes. And so I'm interested in like creating that in a kind of live visual scenario, live audio visual scenario. It's like elasticity of time. And so I tend to use syncopation, I tend to use polyrhythms, Euclidean rhythms, all of this stuff that kind of breaks up this notion of a very regimented time sequence. And I think unfortunately this is like, I'm fighting what is becoming more and more natural in society. Is like we are so by the clock now. It's like getting to be insane. Like we're all literally looking at our phones every 5 minutes and it's telling us the time. We're so time conscious now, and I like this idea of getting away from this very regimented structure to something that is a lot more, I think, natural. I mean, if we were to think about where the 8-hour day, the 40-hour week, it all comes from like the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
We actually, as a human species, haven't lived by the clock in the grand scheme of things for that long. We didn't used to live like this, but
And the clocks were never synchronized like they are now.
Oh, right.
Everybody's clock is on the exact same second. And I think and we're such pattern based beings that when this cycle, this entrainment happens, it becomes very difficult to break out of it. But when you do when you do have that opportunity to break out of it, I think it's that much more powerful.
Yeah.
And so that's I think one of those elements that really sets your work apart.
Yeah, I really realize this when the occasional time when my wife can convince me to take a vacation, because I'm also kind of a workaholic, but is it takes me 2 or 3 days of turning the Wi-Fi off and like not looking at my phone every 10 minutes to like disconnect, and then it feels incredible. Like I'm like, I liken it to those days of endless summers when you were a kid, when the only thing that the only time mechanism you had was your mom calling you home because it's dinner time or something like that. The rest of the time was like this. Like, and I think, I like this idea of, well, at least for 40 minutes or an hour that I play, that people can disconnect from that. And ultimately, that's what I'm trying to achieve.
Right. It's you have that interest yourself that you can step away from that humdrum pattern based existence that we're all forced into and have your own moment to be free.
Well, and if I'm to speak to why I kind of decided to stop using Eurorack Live, it was because, in fact, that kind of having to have a very clear structure of order in order to achieve sonically and visually what I wanted to, I was making my I wasn't. I'm trying to create an experience of transcending time for the audience, but I was not transcending time myself. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, at 3 minutes in, I have to turn this knob,
Yeah,
and then they just and yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, the spontaneity starts to sift away a little bit.
yeah,
too.
because my set is not. I like to have improvisational elements to it, but it's not. And it's not purely structured, but it's also not completely improvised. So I'll be wanting to hit sonically. I will be wanting to hit certain marks and visually as well. And so, sometimes that wasn't always possible in a live set with purely hardware, and I would be like, I'd feel disappointed, and disappointment as an artist never feels great.
Especially when you're coming off stage. That's where you're supposed
Right.
to feel your your greatest moments of zeal, and
Yeah,
that's where you're really supposed to be feeling the most refreshed. You
right.
pine for that place.
But also, like, and then I would consequently be like, well, did I convey what I wanted to convey to the audience? Maybe I let them down, or maybe I just wasted 40 minutes of their time, and, transcending time, getting away from time, last thing I want to be thinking is that I did that, right? So,
Of course, that's maybe part of our artistic brain questioning everything
oh
we
yeah,
do
of
too.
course, we're artists, we're incredibly self-critical. But yeah, I mean, these days I'm just thankful if people turn up. So I want to give them a show that's gonna, like, make them feel something, make them disconnect from the everyday, because I'm thankful they've shown up. I mean,
We
there's plenty of Netflix distractions in the life.
Indeed, yeah, it's becoming easier and easier to stay home and avoid the rest of your surroundings. But let's talk about AI for a minute. Well, actually, let me give a shout out to the chat room here.
Yeah, it looks like some folks are.
Chris from San Diego, I see you in there. Thanks for coming. Brian Rodman, really appreciate your coming in and giving us some feedback on the sound. Dave K, appreciate it. Noise Bleeder, good to see you. We're gonna get that Muffin Zeef modular interview and maybe just a run through of all their modules sometime very soon. And hi Z Lozy, thank you for the feedback. Hi Z was saying, working with others is more time consuming. However, very rewarding when it happens. Any thoughts on that? On collaboration?
Yeah, and that's a great one. I've certainly no shortage of collaboration stories that went good, but also went bad. And I think the key there is, like, to very early on just establish the buy-in. Is this person as into this as me? And just be realistic about that. I mean, because the collaborations that don't go good is where it's like one person's driving it 80% of the time, and the other person's like kind of into it but just wants to get to the end point, right? They want the end point accolades, but they don't want to put in the groundwork, and they don't have total buy-in. I mean,
and unless that's expressly understood, unless that's part of the
oh no,
agreement.
totally. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna come on board and for sure. But I think it's just about being realistic from the start. I mean, certainly when I was younger, every show, after every show, but let's collaborate, and you feel like, yeah, and you spend all this time like schlepping across town to like meet up with this person, and then they've had a big night the night before, and they're hungover, and they're not really into it. They just want to jam, and it's like, I think it sounds very formalized. Kind of goes against what I was just talking about with my live performances, but like, yeah, just actual a bit of preemptive planning and getting an idea of like who's involved. But yeah, it can be tiring. You can waste a lot of time doing it, and
I find limitation, as with many things in the art world, is paramount, right? Like, we don't even want to get ourselves in a situation where we might start a session with no no specific endpoint, only to realize after 15 minutes, oh, this is not going to work, and this other person keeps asking, oh, let's do more takes, let's do another take, let's keep going, and 4 hours later,
Yeah.
nothing has maybe gotten done, or you're feeling like, okay, now you're just, every moment is excruciating, right? Time starts to compress and feel like
Yeah.
every minute is an hour, and so I think setting limits right off the bat. I only have an hour, and I have to go to
Yeah.
another session. I only have an hour, and then I have to do. We all have to do everything else we have to do in life. Who has a day to
Yeah.
collaborate?
I think it can all be like condensed down to just being honest
Yes.
honest with yourself and honest with those you're working with. I mean, I wish it wasn't that I was dishonest, but it wasn't that I was honest either with myself in earlier years of being an artist, and um, is this, asking yourself, is this realistic? Am I overcommitting myself?
Are
Because
you
often,
enjoying yourself?
yeah, and then often in those collaboration situations, I think it's not that people are being dishonest. It's not that they have bad intentions, but we tend to be just say yes to stuff these days.
Mm-hmm.
We're excited about the idea, and we're not really, thinking about the amount of time we're gonna have to put in to make it happen. And yeah, it's just better to be realistic and honest with yourself. The other person might not like your honesty, but you can at least be content within yourself to know that, well, I'm not wasting that person's time. They may have wanted to collaborate, but I don't. I would just be leading them on if I was to say yes.
And yeah, and then you're ultimately saving them probably more aggravation with
Yeah.
getting involved, and then it not maybe fizzling midway through,
Right.
or then motivations start getting questioned and
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like this. So
Yeah.
uh, okay, so let's go back to AI for a minute, because I want to talk about are you using AI tools? How are you employing these things? How can we work that into the collaborative process, as if the AI is a collaborator, maybe?
So, like you mentioned, we're kind of like, in some sense, we're habitual and kind of we like sequences as human beings. And, in music making, once you become aware of a certain amount of, you know, ways to create music and sound, it's hard to go and be like, oh, I'm going to make this drum beat, or I'm going to make this pattern, or I'm going to make this kind of synth line, and not get pulled back into the old chromatic, nature of doing things, or be like, oh, I'm going to make a break beat. And it's like, well, that break beat sounds like every other break beat I've ever made,
You're back on that 16th note grid.
Yeah, I mean,
everything's
it's
patterned.
like, and it just draws from this like whole bankload of memory that you have, that you've built. And unless you actively work at unlearning that, and it's not like you want to forget how to make a breakbeat, but it's not like, if you spend a lot of time unlearning it, perhaps you could get to this point where you're completely spontaneous and always making new stuff. But I think this is where AI and machine learning can come in. And it's like, for example, I built a neural network in Max recently, where I just basically took every MIDI breakbeat I could find online. I made it into a singular MIDI clip, and then I had this neural network analyze that. And then what the neural network does is, basically, I can set a rate, and it will play back derivatives of those 100 different MIDI breakbeats. And this is kind of one of the first like machine learning projects where it's like, for personally, where I've made something and not just on a purely kind of novel sense, being like, oh, that's cool. But like, this is actually like, I sat there after the neural network built, and it was like, you know, started it on its sequence of what it thinks a breakbeat is, and I was impressed. I was like, damn, this is like, just kind of changes within a certain pattern where it's like, well, I wouldn't have changed to another beat there, but it calculates. Stemming back, you can set basically how many iterations prior to the current beat it wants to reference for systems or reference for similarities, and then off of those 20, so it has a Markov chain kind of element to it, and then it will generate the next bit.
So you can set all of this up inside of a Max patch now?
Yeah, so there's actually in Max, there's a thing that was introduced in Max 7 called the package manager. And it's basically like people submit a third party package, and some of them are from like academic institutes, some of them are from academics, just singular, and some of them are just from the public. But before they make it to the package manager in Max, they go through a pretty regimented testing process. So they're in some sense endorsed by Cycling, and there's 2 different machine learning packages in there, and they're amazing. My favorite one is this. There's 2 different ones. My favorite one is ML Star, Machine Learning Star, and it's got a whole bunch of different ways to just basically start to get into machine learning.
Just a message to the chat room: if you're hearing a lot of breakbeats in the background right now, it's because there's some construction going on in the neighboring space. Hopefully it's not totally. I hope it's not totally messing up our stream here, but I think it's not quite making it too badly into the mics.
I think it's okay.
Okay, so this is kind of mind-blowing. One thing that maybe we should connect the dots here with Max is that Max has built into it a tutorial system, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even when I first used Max, there were tutorial patches which were extremely well documented and taught you how to use the application. Does this exist in these package systems where can anyone download this package and start building their own neural network?
Yeah, there's some. I mean, they're not super extensive, so you need to think laterally a little bit if you're going to make a more deeper version of a neural network. But it's by all means all of the guts are there for you to go deeper or as deep as you'd like. But there's there's a whole bunch of help files. There's no tutorials on them, but there is actually a guy that did a tutorial. He did a 3-part tutorial series on the ML Star package.
Awesome.
That's on YouTube. So if you just type ML Star Max MSP into YouTube, they should come up. But that ML Star package is a blast. It's like, there's even just a straight up ML.Markov object, which is a straightforward Markov chain. You set the order. The order is basically how many iterations beforehand do you want to reference. You feed in a MIDI file and it just blurts out versions of what it thinks.
Wow.
And it's great because it doesn't go off. It goes off whatever you feed it, basically. But it's like that stuff is, I think, very interesting. And, in terms of like not using that purely as the output, right? But melding that with your own organic input after the machine learning element has happened. So it's like this symbiotic kind of like collaborator. It's like a collaborator, right? It's like, I don't know what Joe's going to play if we were going to start collaborating, but it's like, that's where you and the computer start to actually collaborate together.
And that's, to me, that is the epitome of the creative process, because you're now giving some influence to, in a sense, a virtual player. You're saying, hey, play like this, which is how a jazz band leader would tell the drummer to play. They're not going to give them a chart telling them exactly what notes to play and exactly what place. In the rock band they will, but not in the jazz
you
band.
can have a few musicians that are AI based,
Totally.
and as long as you had a mixer where you could cut in between them, then now it's you and them.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And see, like, this is where I think it's, and you can get more in depth, but like, for example, the neural network it's not like you could probably even create one in a more organic sense. If you were to take those 100 breakbeats and make a spreadsheet and go through it and individually analyze for relationships, that's still pretty hard. You probably a really great professor of mathematics could do that. I am not, I'm not that strong at math. But But this is where it can use AI and machine learning. I think it's really interesting. And as far as
Is this where Magenta's
yeah,
starting
I
from?
mean,
These two things?
so Google actually made a bunch of different Maxwell Live devices that you can download. One is like basically a neural network built into a drum generator. And yeah, the same kind of
I
thing.
don't think you can train it though, right? It's
No,
it's already
so
trained.
so
It's pre-trained.
yeah,
drummer.
I don't recall how they trained it, but yeah, it's
They
already it's
used
like
they
the
brought in
models.
drummers and had them play on
Yeah,
MIDI kits, I believe.
the model's already built. So this is where Max is advantageous because you can feed it whatever you want. So you can actually, and I did this. Like, I got on the Monome and just threw a bunch of patterns in, for like 10 minutes, and then had it play them back, and it's like pretty cool because it's able to, you put in one pattern, next pattern, next pattern, and it's able to determine the relationship between those three patterns and then create derivatives off of that. And it's like, by the time I get to the third pattern, I can't remember the first pattern that I put in there, right? But the computer can. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then I think your other point about then filtering all of that output through your own filter, and maybe tweaking things
Yeah,
that thing might not generate the results that you as the virtual band leader want per se, but then
right.
you have the freedom to give them feedback and move some notes around and say play more on the beat or more syncopation or whatever it might be.
Exactly, Joe. And that's where if you take those elements and then utilize those to create performative aspects and be like, well, I personally organically wouldn't put a hit there. But we've found a relationship where a hit there makes sense because we've analyzed 100 patterns prior to that. That's really interesting. And I find sonically what happens is that can be where you start to kind of transcend time, in fact, because people inherently will start to expect certain elements of a sound before you've actually played them, going off of their previous experience of listening to music and things like that. But if you can start to play with that with the audience, you start to also play with time.
Absolutely, and then you're really breaking out of those patterns. That's really the whole point of all of this, right? Is so that you're not just doing the same thing that your own entrained brain is going to tend to do. We want to experience new things.
Exactly, and it's like we've all, once you're of a certain age, you've listened to enough music to know that music doesn't stay the same decade to decade. It evolves, it changes. The thing that seems obnoxious and experimental now could well be mainstream radio in 10 years' time. We evolve as humans, we evolve our own brains and listening, and we, I mean, it's just hard to believe and see that whole way American kind of EDM exploded, and
Yeah,
next thing it's stadiums, next thing it's all over the radio.
yeah. The techniques that we were inspired by in some of the most left field
Yeah,
experimental artists in the late 90s 2000s started permeating into pop music and
yeah.
rap and these things. So
Richie Horton and Plastic Man. That wasn't mainstream, and I mean it's not mainstream now, but it's huge. I mean Richie's doing pretty good. He's flying all over the world in private jets, and
yeah, I think there's a direct lineage to what we hear in big room and festival stages now, and obviously we've crossed over so many bridges in that process to get here, but yeah, it's very interesting time.
I saw that article. There was an article in EDM really was huge around 2012, 13, and they said this article really predicted a rise in electronic music post EDM in more, kind of esoteric realms, like just basic, very raw techno and things like that. They likened it to when metal evolved to the point where it got very theatrical, a la Motley Crue, big stadium tours, fireworks, girls, all that crazy stuff.
Mhm.
And then people got a little tired of that, and or they got into that, and that was their inroad into music. But then they started to explore more, and then post hair metal, we went back to this very rudimentary style of rock with like Nirvana in
Mhm.
flannelette shirts, guitar, bass, drums, very raw, very
Yeah, more of that
basic.
punk aesthetic a little
Yeah,
bit.
and that was a huge era for music that was completely opposed to massive stadium tours. And
Mhm.
we've kind of seen that with electronic music now. Like this huge rise of like super raw techno is just mind-boggling. I think it's amazing to see all these artists who were renowned techno artists in the 90s but were nowhere near getting the kind of like exposure that they're getting now, and they stuck with it, and now they're reaping their rewards.
Yeah.
um,
And that you kind of see that happening throughout the last 20, 30, 40 years where there's these there's an emergence of an underground scene into the mainstream in a sense, and it gets so big that there's a kind of a slapback genre wise, right?
yeah,
That's where sort of the early days of dubstep came from, and that's where I think as you said, now we're getting this resurgence of kind of the organic beginnings of the genres again
yeah,
that came before. Marshall Jefferson was on the Beatport Top 10, the last month with kind of like a remaster of a track that was 30, 40 years ago almost.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's really interesting how these things are shifting and coming back, and the glammy fireworks stadium. We used to call them jock jams back in the 90s.
Yeah.
They had an album called Jock Jams, and it was like all of the Venga Boys and all the stuff that you could still to this day hear in stadiums at every football game
Yeah.
and baseball game, and that's kind of that was one of the sounds that kind of permeated in EDM even, and it's still there. It's always going to be part of that festival scene, but now you see that that stage is getting a little smaller, and the other ones are getting a little bit bigger.
Yeah, one really interesting moment I saw that right in the cusp of it was like 2013, and I went to Hardfest,
Oh yeah,
and I felt like a fish out of water a little bit, but thankfully around the mid mark, Square Pusher came on, and it
at
was
Hardfest.
yeah, Square
Wow.
Pusher played not his latest album, which is amazing that just came out, but the last one which he released. Um, he played Hardfest, and it was mind blowing. Like it was mind blowing, but mind blowing for me. But honestly, I think it was a very hard 1 hour for a lot of other people
Oh yeah.
because uh, it was amazing. It was so good, but he was going bananas.
Was he
and
playing bass?
he came
yeah.
out from behind and played bass, came out from behind, and he had a lot of hardware on stage and insane visual setup. He utilized all the screens, but there was just like basically had the helmet,
Mhm.
bunch of strobing, and it was so good. But like I think it was a very tough time for a bunch of other folks. But
Yeah.
to me, then like 2 acts later, Skrillex came on, and within 15 minutes of him playing, I disengaged because he just uses the same format, like the big rise, the drop, rise, drop, rise, drop. It's a great formula for
Guitar step.
It's good for the
Yeah.
neophytes, certainly.
Yeah.
Like they can get their adrenaline pumping, and
yeah,
but there's no rinse, there's no cool off, there's no
No.
dynamicism.
Yeah.
Really.
I get it. I love those early Skrillex releases, the EP, like Scary Monsters and Bright Sparks.
Yeah, that was really the era of bro step when
Yeah.
everything was just grinding, in your
Yep.
face business. It's still there's of course still that too. That's also
yeah,
will never
in-
lose
in-
its stage at the EDM festivals, but yeah, there's this other slapback happening.
But in the post of this, it's so great to see genres like just ambient getting so big now, and noise. There's so many great noise shows now.
Yeah, festivals even.
Yeah, noise festivals, Merzbow selling out big venues.
Mhm.
You know, it's great. I think it's a great time for music.
I think one other one other topic on the AI subject, and Conti, who was here a few weeks ago, I saw it posted this week. Urcam released or teased, I'm not sure if it's fully released, a new AI device that will listen to synth patches in tracks and show you how to recreate those synth patches on
That's
your plugin.
that's pretty awesome.
It was in the imagery I saw. They were using UHE plugins, and so I don't know how that connects to everyone's favorite serum and things like this.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is great. I mean, I this there's this thing where and it doesn't really apply to music so much because I feel like anyone who gets into music is continually pushing themselves to learn more. But you know, society in general, this old notion of like you finish high school or college or whatever, and that's where you finish learning, right? And then you put all of those things that you learnt into action. But I like this idea of like as creatives, as music makers, we are continually pushing ourselves to learn. And I see AI and machine learning being this thing that can show us. We may not always see the path of where we can learn more. Like I try, as a rule of habit, I try to learn one new thing a day, and it's pretty easy with Max because if I get stuck learning, finding something new to learn that's not Max related, I can always just go to Max and open a random object and be like, "Well, I didn't know this object existed," because there's no shortage of those. but but you know, I that's just personally that's how I keep my life interesting is try and keep learning because I find eventually you don't always know the things you've learned. They accumulate in time and then you can put them into practice. And uh, but sometimes I don't know what I should be learning. You know, it's like
Yeah.
I could just sit stagnant, but you know, that's where I think AI and machine learning can really help us is to show new paths of creativity or new sequences or new possibilities. And I don't think it's something to fear. I think it's important to be aware of it. It's important to be aware of how mass media, the government, authoritarian type folks are wanting to use it. We have to be conscious of that because not everyone wants to use it to make great creative experiences. Some folks want to use it to control society, to
Sure.
keep tabs. So it is, but I don't think it's worth, I don't think it warrants something to be scared about. I think awareness is more the thing to be, more the thing to be key. I saw,
We can reprogram the AI to point to the crooks,
right.
right? And
I saw
keep them on the billboard sign.
I saw Grimes and Zola Jesus and Holly Herndon was weighing in as well on because Grimes came out and said that like live music's gonna be dead in like 2 years time or something because she's just gonna send a hologram out on tour or something. But like, yeah, people got really
Okay.
people.
That's how you want to do it.
Right. And Zola Jesus got really mad about it. She was gone for weeks.
Yeah.
And you know, she had some valid points, techno-fascism within the like Silicon Valley and the likes.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think it's just like I don't think it's worth getting mad about. You can try and fight it, but it's probably not a winning battle. And
Well,
it's better
I think
to just be conscious and aware.
I think you have to take all of that with a grain of salt because it's coming from someone who's being enveloped by that techno fascism, and
Yeah.
it's hard to take seriously someone who disregards the interests of their fans so quickly to
Oh,
just say,
right.
"Oh, well, I'll just send out because
Hologram.
so and so says that's going to be what it is," or it already is that for a I mean, there's literally already hologram artists that
Right.
have no human form whatsoever, right?
Right.
There's is it Kitsune? I can't remember the name of
Yeah.
that. The Japanese,
Yeah.
anime character who literally tours performing as a hologram. There is no actual person. There's no actual artist. But like the hubris to think that people will consume and follow that. I think there will always, I'm sure Grimes will always have her fans, and of course now we have Elon putting out his techno jams. The it's just like
Yeah. I
light me on fire type of mindset, and as a listener, I mean, but I think how can that survive in an environment where people are starving for something honest and legit?
Yeah, I mean, there's not even anything innovative about that if she is to do that because this is like already been done. It's not pushing the cusp of technology ultimately.
And people have
And
said live music would be done for probably 50 years, probably since Morton Subotnick was making generative modular synth patches, and maybe before. People have always been playing this
right.
game of, oh, it's all over, clutch our pearls and let's.
Yeah, I actually think live music's become stronger. Actually, I mean, if anything, the you know, and we don't need to go down this road, but with Spotify and things like this, the accessibility of music's never been higher. If you're actually interested in a certain person's music or in a certain artist's music, the only way to have a better experience of that is to go and see them live. And so, what I'm seeing is just more concerts, more bigger concerts, more interesting concerts.
And
Um,
of course, everyone who's making music wants to play concerts because that's the only way to make music, or to
pretty,
make money, rather.
pretty much the only way to get paid now. I mean, you don't make much of streams. You
Right.
don't make. No one's getting paid record advances anymore. Um, the live concerts where people get paid.
Yeah, and that will always go all the way down to the grassroots, to literally concerts in homes, you know, people performing in backyards. That's where some of the interesting stuff is born anyway. So you're not going to find very much innovation in a show where the artist is phoning it in literally
Yeah.
through a graphic image.
Plus, I really like that kind of getting out, going to a concert thing is like almost like we're almost getting to this thing where we don't do that anymore. Like we're getting away from crowds. We're getting away from being like amongst a bunch of strangers. It's less common, and so I think that's where the concert's great. I mean, it's almost can be uncomfortable for some people now, but it's like once they're there and they're having an experience, uh,
Yeah, brings people together. The shared experiences are important for people, and takes us to a different place as a collective.
yeah, I just don't think you can get that same feeling from virtual reality or something. Put on some goggles and be at a concert. Uh, you're not gonna have that ultra enthusiastic fan losing their shit standing next to you. You're not gonna have the guy with BO standing on the other side of you.
Hmm.
There's all of these things, and some are good and some are bad, but they all make up that experience. And um,
It's not the same when you have an avatar doing three different dance moves next to you.
yeah, not at all, not at all.
Uh, well, I think we're gonna have you back in the near future to do a Max discussion. And
Yeah, I think
look at
next
some
time
Max.
bring the laptop and some controllers over, and we like get into some stuff.
I think that would be really
Yeah.
really cool. And I mean, for people who don't know, Tom has some incredible tutorials on YouTube. Those are through Cycling 74, right?
Yeah, there's most of those are through cycling. There's some on my personal YouTube channel, but yeah, I generally type Tom Hall. Some are on Ableton's YouTube as well. This stuff I've presented at their Loop
And Loop,
events.
yeah, great video.
But yeah, if you could just type Tom Hall, Max MSP, or Tom Hall, Max for Live, you'll find a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, incredible tools, incredible, very easy to follow tutorials on how to get started building your own tools in Max for Live. I've find myself going back to those often, not
Yeah.
just because I've taken over your Max for Live class at Musicians Institute, but also because we learn so many things. Sometimes we need a refresher.
Yeah.
We need to remember, oh, how my brain is full. How would I do that thing
It's
that we used to
crazy
do?
that Max for Live programming series is nearly 9 years old, and it's had like something like 2 million total views now or something. It needs a refresher. It's still very relevant.
Yeah, everything still seems to work the same way as it did
Yeah.
when you made those videos, and of course that will ebb and flow, but that's the nature of Max. And but I think that the depth there is so useful, so educational.
It's just exciting because it's a somewhat simplified or easy way for you to constantly be extending the platform you're creating in, and that element it makes it for me personally makes it exciting, and I think for many others as well. It's
Yeah.
like you don't get to a certain point where you're like, well, I can't. I've explored all the sequences in here, and the only way for me to explore more sequences or something modulation possibilities is to move to a completely new piece of software. You can just go ahead and build something yourself or use something weird and esoteric that someone else has made. I mean, and MaxForLive.com has something like 15,000 Max for Live devices. I mean, that's
Oh, yeah.
just mind-boggling.
And those are mostly free.
Mostly free.
Function expanding tools that make Ableton that much more open of an environment. It was a very forward-thinking move to put these things together and give us such a wide variety of things. Now we can hoard Max for Live patches in addition to our plugins. Though I advise not doing it. Get the things you
Good
need.
way to fill up your hard drive.
Indeed, yeah, and to kill a lot of time without being very creative. But well, thank you, Tom. I think this was really
My pleasure.
inspiring, and
Yeah, thank you.
every time we get to
Thanks,
chat,
yeah,
it's like
awesome.
some new, deep discussion about what's currently happening in the music world, what's coming to the music world. So
Yeah, I mean, this is the other thing, and there's so much cool stuff coming down the pipeline. I can't speak about any of it, but yeah, it's exciting. We're not at the end of the road by any means. Yeah.
yeah, still on the cutting edge, and I think we'll have to have you back very soon and
Let's do it.
get another taste. Thanks everybody for coming in and staying with us. Brian, High Z, Noise Bleeder, all you other folks who maybe be quiet or are being quiet out there. We're doing another show tomorrow at noon with an old colleague of mine, Rob Barbado, who lived in LA for a number of years and performed in a number of successful acts out here. He's a producer, film scorer, many other things, and he now lives in Austin, and he's here for just a couple of days working on a new record. So we're going to have him in tomorrow. He actually works for the same company that Surachai works for. He's in
Squeaky?
Austin. Yeah, Squeaky
Yeah,
Clean, exactly.
nice.
So we're going to get a totally different perspective on the production and music life from him tomorrow. So hopefully you guys can join us. We will see you then. Thanks again for coming in.
Have a great day.